On a September morning back in 1988, 19-year-old Tara Calico went for a bike ride and simply vanished. For 9 agonizing months, her family had nothing but questions. Then, over 1,000 miles away in a Florida parking lot, a single Polaroid was found. It showed a young woman and a boy, both bound and gagged in the back of a van. The girl looked uncannily like Tara. This one photograph would ignite a decades-long mystery, packed with conflicting evidence, whispers of a police cover-up, and one haunting question: is this a picture of Tara Calico, and what twisted truth does it hide? Belen, New Mexico, in the late 80s was a small town, the kind of place where everybody knew everybody. It was a quiet community nestled in the vast, sun-drenched landscape of Valencia County. This is where Tara Lee Calico grew up. Born on February 28, 1969, Tara was a vibrant, meticulous young woman on the very brink of her future. Friends and family describe her as fun, smart, and incredibly kind. She graduated from Belen High School in 1987 and was now a sophomore at the University of New Mexico, studying to become a psychologist or psychiatrist. Tara was the definition of organized and driven. She was an independent person who made lists for everything, carefully scheduling her days to balance her studies, her job at a local bank, and her social life. Her childhood friend, Melinda Bell, later recalled, "Tara had a bright light around her. She showed me kindness and I will never forget that." A huge part of Tara's disciplined routine was her daily bike ride. Almost every morning, she'd head out on a 36-mile loop along New Mexico State Road 47, a familiar stretch of two-lane highway. She'd often pop in her yellow Sony Walkman to listen to her favorite bands, like Boston, as she rode. Her mother, Patty Dool, used to join her on these rides, but she'd recently stopped. Patty had a deeply unsettling experience, a feeling that a driver was stalking them, getting aggressively close and passing them over and over again. Worried, she begged Tara to start carrying mace, but Tara, full of the cheerful invincibility of youth, just brushed it off. It was the same road she'd ridden for years. What could possibly happen? September 20, 1988, started out like any other Tuesday. Tara had a tennis match with her boyfriend at 12:30 p.m. and a class later that afternoon. Her own bike had a flat, so she borrowed her mom's, a very distinctive neon pink Huffy with yellow cables. As she got ready to leave around 9:30 a.m., she made a light-hearted joke to her mom that would become tragically prophetic. "If I'm not back by noon," she said, "come look for me." It was just a casual remark about her tight schedule. But it would be the last thing she ever said to her mother. With that, Tara Calico clipped on her headphones, hopped on that pink bike, and rode off into the bright New Mexico morning, right out of her family's life forever. The sun climbed higher, and noon came and went. When Tara still hadn't returned, her mom, Patty, figured she probably just got another flat tire or ran into some other simple delay. But as the hours stretched on, a knot of real anxiety began to tighten. True to her word, Patty got in her car and drove Tara's 36-mile route, scanning the long, lonely highway for any sign of her daughter or that bright pink bike. She drove it twice. Nothing. Panic started to set in. Patty called the local hospitals, her voice trembling as she asked if a young woman had been in an accident. The answer was always no. After calling Tara's friends, she finally, with a heavy sense of dread, called the Valencia County Sheriff's Department to report her daughter missing. The search kicked off immediately. Police and hundreds of volunteers on foot, on horseback, and in ATVs fanned out across the area. Planes buzzed overhead, scanning the vast, unforgiving landscape. But they found almost nothing. The pink Huffy bicycle, something that should have been easy to spot, had vanished completely. Then, a small, heartbreaking clue surfaced. On the side of the road, searchers found broken pieces of Tara's yellow Sony Walkman and a cassette tape of a Boston album. Patty Dool was convinced her daughter had thrown them there in a moment of terror, leaving a trail like breadcrumbs to mark the path of her abduction. Investigators also found what looked like skid marks from a bike, a possible sign of a struggle. As police interviewed people in the area, a disturbing picture started to form. No one saw an abduction, but at least 7 different people reported seeing Tara on her bike that morning. And several of them remembered something else, an older, light-colored pickup truck, maybe a '53 Ford with a camper shell. They said this truck was following Tara, trailing her closely as she rode north, back toward home. One witness saw her around 11:45 a.m., just a few miles from her house, with her headphones on, seemingly unaware of the truck right behind her. Another witness claimed they saw 2 people inside it. This was the last confirmed sighting of Tara Calico. Investigators also learned that in the months before she disappeared, threatening notes had been left on Tara's car. Her mother's story about being stalked on the bike path suddenly felt much more sinister. "I knew, my parents knew, immediately that some foul play had happened," her older brother, Chris Calico, would later say. "We didn't have any idea what." Sheriff Lawrence Romero, who was leading the case, quickly ruled out the idea that Tara had run away. "It just wasn't in her character. We feel this is an involuntary disappearance," he stated. "For 9 long months, that's all anyone had. A vanished girl, a few pieces of a broken Walkman, and the ghost of an old pickup truck." The case went cold. Then, in the summer of 1989, everything changed. On June 15, 1989, in Port St. Joe, Florida, well over 1,000 miles from the quiet roads of Belen, a woman was walking through a convenience store parking lot. She spotted a single Polaroid photograph lying face down on the asphalt. When she picked it up, she was looking at a deeply disturbing image. The photo showed a young woman and a small boy, side by side on what looked like rumpled sheets in the dark, cramped back of a van. Both were bound. Thick, black duct tape was stretched cruelly across their mouths. Their eyes were wide open, staring right at the camera with an expression that could be terror, defiance, or just complete and utter hopelessness. The woman who found the photo told police that when she'd first pulled into the lot, a white, windowless Toyota cargo van was parked in that exact spot. She remembered the driver was a man in his 30s with a mustache. By the time she came out of the store, the van was gone, and the picture was left behind. Police set up roadblocks, but the van and the driver were never found. For weeks, the photo was just a local mystery in Florida. But in July, the show A Current Affair broadcast the image nationally, and it landed right in the lives of the Calico family. Friends who saw the show were struck by the chilling resemblance between the bound woman and the missing girl from New Mexico. They immediately called Tara's mom. The Polaroid threw the investigation into a frantic new direction. Patty and her husband, John Dool, were faced with an image that was both a glimmer of hope and a source of absolute horror. The thought that Tara might still be alive was electrifying. But the idea of her being a captive, bound and terrified in a van, was a complete nightmare. As her stepsister Michelle Dool later said, "Does it make sense? No. That's not the story that makes sense." Still, the resemblance was hard to deny. Polaroid officials were brought in and determined that the film used in the photo wasn't available for purchase until May of 1989. This was a critical detail. It meant the photo had been taken recently, at least 8 months after Tara disappeared. For her family, this seemed to confirm that if this was Tara, she had been alive long after she was taken. The Polaroid wasn't just a picture, it was a proof of life, a terrifying message in a bottle. It turned a local missing persons case into a national enigma, all centered on one haunting question: what twisted truth did this photograph really hold? For Patty Dool, that Polaroid became an object of intense, agonizing study. For a mother stuck in the hell of not knowing for 9 months, the photo was both a blessing and a curse. At first, she didn't want to believe the terrified woman was her daughter. But the more she looked, the more certain she became. "I'm convinced it's Tara," she stated publicly. Her belief wasn't just based on facial resemblance. It was anchored by a small, specific detail only a mother would know. On the woman's leg, you could see a discolored patch of skin, a scar. Patty recognized it instantly as a scar Tara got in a car accident years before. To her, this was undeniable proof. Another detail seemed to seal the connection. Lying next to the bound woman was a paperback book, My Sweet Audrina by V.C. Andrews. Patty confirmed it was one of Tara's favorite books by one of her favorite authors. Was this a bizarre coincidence? Or was it a deliberate message from Tara herself, a way to signal who she was? Hoping for a definitive answer, the family and investigators sent the photo for expert analysis. But the results only made things more confusing. Scotland Yard in the UK examined the photo and concluded it was likely Tara Calico. For Patty, this was official validation of what she felt in her heart. But other agencies weren't so sure. The Los Alamos National Laboratory, right there in New Mexico, did its own analysis and came to the opposite conclusion: they did not believe it was Tara. Then came the FBI, whose findings were the most frustrating of all: inconclusive. They could neither confirm nor deny it was her. The Valencia County Sheriff's Office seemed to lean away from the photo being real. They reportedly pointed out to Patty that the woman's legs appeared freshly shaved and there was no irritation around the duct tape on her mouth, which you might expect if it had been on for a while. To them, this suggested the photo could have been staged, a cruel hoax. So the family was trapped. Scotland Yard said yes. Los Alamos said no. The FBI said maybe. The anguish for Patty was unimaginable. She chose to believe Scotland Yard in her own eyes. The photo, as horrifying as it was, meant her daughter was alive. Mom really did not want to believe she was dead, period, her son Chris later explained. And photographic evidence of a young woman alive, even though she's an extremist, is something to latch onto. The stress of it all took a devastating toll. Chris recalled how police would send photos of every possible lead, including gruesome images of unidentified bodies. Every time Mom got an envelope with the newest pictures, she had to look at them, he said. She could not, but it tore her up every time. Patty Duell would cling to the belief that the girl in the Polaroid was her daughter until she died in 2006, her heart broken by an unresolved mystery. The search for answers in cases like Tara Calico's is a marathon, and it's the public's continued interest that keeps these stories from being forgotten. If you're finding this story compelling and want to support our work in bringing attention to these important cases, think about becoming a member or checking out our merch. It's a small way to help us keep going. Now, let's get back to the other victim in that horrifying photograph. The chilling Polaroid didn't just show a young woman, there was also a young boy, bound and gagged right next to her. His identity was another layer to this baffling puzzle. As the photo went national, another grieving family in New Mexico felt a jolt of recognition. The parents of 9-year-old Michael Henley were convinced the boy in the van was their son. Michael had vanished in April 1988, just 5 months before Tara. He was on a camping trip with his dad in the rugged Zuni Mountains of New Mexico, about 75 miles from where Tara disappeared. He'd simply wandered away from their campsite and was never seen again. Now, looking at the Polaroid, his mother was almost certain it was Michael. This potential connection was terrifying. Could a single predator have abducted both Tara and Michael, months apart, from different parts of the state? The two families, united in their desperate hope, met with investigators. But this tragic link would eventually be severed. In June of 1990, just over a year after the Polaroid was found, a child's remains were discovered in the Zuni Mountains, only 7 miles from the campsite where Michael Henley had disappeared. Dental records confirmed the heartbreaking truth: it was Michael. Investigators concluded he had likely just gotten lost and died of exposure. He was gone long before that Polaroid was ever taken. This discovery proved the boy in the photo was not Michael Henley. While it brought a painful and tragic closure for the Henley family, it cast a huge shadow of doubt over the Polaroid theory. If the first identification was wrong, could the second one be wrong, too? People started to look at the photo more critically, pointing out subtle differences between the woman and Tara, like the shape of their eyebrows. The search for the boy's identity went cold, and to this day, he remains unidentified. The Polaroid, once a concrete clue, was becoming more and more ambiguous, a phantom image that created far more questions than answers. Other mysterious photos would surface over the years, one found in California, another on an Amtrak train, but like the first, they led absolutely nowhere, just adding more static to a case already drowning in uncertainty. With the Polaroid lead fizzling out, the investigation circled back to where it all began, Valencia County. Over the decades, the case file grew thick with tips and theories, but no arrests were ever made. The debate became, was Tara taken by a random predator who crossed state lines, like the Florida Polaroid suggested? Or was the crime something much closer to home, a dark secret held by the small community of Belen? Over the years, that second theory started to gain more traction. The focus shifted to a group of local young men who might have known Tara. In 2008, 20 years after she vanished, Valencia County Sheriff Rene Rivera made a startling public statement. He announced that he knew what happened to Tara Calico. According to Rivera, witnesses told him that Tara's death was an accident that turned into a horrific crime. The story was that 2 local teenagers who knew Tara were following her in their truck. They were harassing her, he suggested, when they accidentally hit her bike. In a panic, they abducted the injured Tara, and with the help of others, later killed her to keep her quiet. Rivera said he knew the names of those involved and that their parents might have even helped them cover it up. He believed her body was buried somewhere in the county. This was a bombshell. But it came with a huge catch. Rivera admitted he didn't have enough physical evidence, specifically a body, to make an arrest. "We do have a case put together," he said, "but we want to make sure that this case is a concrete case." Tara's stepfather, John Duell, was furious. He felt it was irresponsible to make claims like that without arresting anyone. But without Tara's remains, the district attorney was reluctant to press charges. The suspects, who were never publicly named, remained free. The community buzzed with rumors about local boys from well-known families being responsible. It explained why the case went cold so fast. It suggested a conspiracy of silence. But without charges, it was all just a theory. The years turned into decades. The FBI offered a $20,000 reward. The case was featured on Unsolved Mysteries and Oprah, but nothing broke it open. Tara Calico was officially declared deceased in 1998. Her death ruled a homicide, but her case remained agonizingly open. While the official investigation stalled, someone else was trying to find the truth: Tara's former classmate, Melinda Bell. Haunted by her friend's disappearance, she was spurred into action by Sheriff Rivera's 2008 announcement. If he knew who did it but couldn't act, she would find out why. She launched her own investigation, determined to uncover the secrets her hometown seemed to be hiding. Her work became a detailed podcast called Vanished: The Tara Calico Investigation. She re-examined case files, interviewed witnesses who had never spoken out, and explored the pervasive theory of a local cover-up. The podcast painted a chilling picture of a small town where fear and loyalty may have buried the truth. One of the most explosive allegations was that there was a cover-up within the Valencia County Sheriff's Office itself. At the time Tara disappeared, the sheriff was Lawrence Romero. Rumors had swirled for years that his own son and his son's friends were the ones in the truck that day. The podcast explored claims that the initial investigation was deliberately botched, that evidence was ignored or suppressed to protect the sons of powerful local men, including a law enforcement officer. While these are still just allegations, they offered a powerful explanation for why the case never moved forward. Melinda's investigation wasn't without risk. As she started asking tough questions, she faced a hostile reaction. She reported getting death threats, warnings to stop digging. It got so bad she had to move out of state for her own safety. But the threats only hardened her resolve. All the things that have happened to me only justified in my mind that I needed to keep going, she said. It just pushed me harder. The podcast put Tara's story back in the headlines and put pressure on law enforcement to take a fresh look. It suggested that the twisted truth of what happened to Tara wasn't in a Florida parking lot, but in the very fabric of the town she called home. For 34 years, the Tara Calico case was a landscape of cold trails and painful anniversaries. Then, in June of 2023, something suddenly shifted. The Valencia County Sheriff's Office and the FBI held a press conference that sent a shockwave through everyone who had followed this story. Sheriff Denise Vigil stood before reporters and made a stunning announcement. After all these years, there had been a significant breakthrough. Law enforcement believes there is sufficient evidence to submit this investigation to the district attorney's office for review of potential charges, she stated. The lead investigator confirmed that new evidence had emerged and that they believed they had identified the offenders associated with Tara Calico's disappearance. It was a monumental moment. For the first time, authorities were officially saying they had not only identified suspects but had enough evidence to potentially prosecute them. This lined up perfectly with the local theory that had been building for decades. However, the authorities were careful. They announced that the identities of the suspects and the new evidence were sealed by court order. Nothing would be public unless a grand jury handed down indictments. This was to protect the legal process, especially given how old the case is and that many key people, including Tara's parents, have passed away. Sheriff Vigil spoke directly to the family's lasting pain. The people responsible will soon have to answer to this family and to the community who has never stopped thinking of Tara, she said. This is the most significant movement in the case in over 3 decades. It's a moment of cautious optimism. While no charges have been filed as of late 2025, the case is now in the hands of the district attorney. The dark cloud of rumor that has hung over Valencia County for a generation may finally be starting to part. The question of what happened on that lonely highway is no longer just a haunting mystery, it is now an active matter for the justice system. The truth, after all these years, may finally be within reach. So where does that leave us? The story of Tara Calico is a maze of haunting questions. It started with a girl on a bike and was thrown into chaos by a single, terrifying Polaroid. Was that picture Tara, a desperate cry for help from 1,000 miles away? Or was it a cruel red herring that sent everyone on a wild goose chase while the real killers were back home all along? For over 35 years, her family and friends have lived through a nightmare of conflicting theories. Tara's mom passed away believing her daughter was alive in that photo, while many in her hometown believed the secret was buried just miles from where she was last seen. The 2023 announcement that suspects have been identified offers the first real hope for closure. But until an arrest is made and a conviction is secured, the case isn't over. Tara's story is a powerful reminder of a family's relentless love, and how one single image can somehow both illuminate and completely obscure the truth. The ghost of the girl in the Polaroid still lingers, a symbol of one of America's most disturbing and enduring cold cases. The debate over the Polaroid and the local theories continues to this day. What do you think happened to Tara Calico? Share your thoughts respectfully in the comments below. Public discussion is what keeps these cases from being forgotten. And if you have any information, no matter how small it seems, please contact the Valencia County Sheriff's Office at 505-866-2400 or the FBI. The search for justice for Tara is not over. Thank you for watching.